For the enjoyment of the season, I decided to look into a folklore that is as Halloween can get. Jack-o'-lanterns. They appear by the door of many homes in the Western world, from where they light the way for children to collect their sugary treats each Halloween night. As the US was founded and run by a bunch of white guys, basically from England at the very beginning, we get a lot of our folklore and traditions from that region. From the broadest research and general Halloween stories, we know that general Halloween traditions were passed down and altered from the Gaelic autumn festival Samhain. The greatest examples of this continuation were the lanterns made out of turnips and then pumpkins, the latter of which show up in various spooky stories. The latter shows up in various spooky stories throughout the history of many countries, like the horseman, who just happens to be headless. My name's Renee. You're listening to Detours in Archaeology. This is Jack of the Dancing Flames. Happy Halloween. Well, gather around and I'll elucidate a tale we've all heard about the legend of Sleepy Hollow, in which the headless horseman was a dead Hessian who died by a cannonball to the head syndrome in a nameless battle in the Revolutionary War. He was said to have a jack-o'-lantern for a head and would throw it at his victims, or chop off their heads with a slice of a sword, after, quote, being bewitched during the early days of the Dutch settlement, or that of an old Indian chief. The wizard of his tribe held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson, unquote. Legends of Sleepy Hollow, Washington Irving, 1820. But this idea of the jack-o'-lanterns was clearly a well-known staple of Washington Irving's 1820 fictional written retelling of the Sleepy Hollow legend, set in 1790 in a sleepy little town around the Dutch settlement of Tarrytown, New York. As this was a retelling of the story, there are plenty of variations between the oral folklore and what was written down, like the reason for the curse itself, and as the first ghost story in this new country is as changeable as any mythology. The Headless Horseman isn't written to have a jack-o'-lantern as a head. Irving wrote, his horror was still more increased on observing that the stranger's head was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. And when Crane had disappeared after being chased, the clues found were a beaten saddle, the schoolmaster/school choir leader's hat, and a shattered pumpkin. But it's never explicitly stated that the jack-o'-lantern was acting as his head. This might have been altered to make the 1940 Disney cartoon a bit less gory. But possibly it was assumed that in the very act of hurling his head at him, the pumpkin evidence was the head that he threw. The jack-o'-lantern showing up as a head prop could almost attribute some of its roots to the headless horseman from Celtic folklore, the Dullahan, also called Gan Con, meaning without a head. This horseman/carriage driver doesn't always carry a jack-o'-lantern either, but he is known to carry his own rotting corpse head on his arm with a light inside to act as his lantern as he whips his horse with an old victim's spine. The supernatural nature of such characters is evident in medieval literature as well, as seen in the fayish Green Knight from Gawain and the Green Knight, who could survive decapitation. Irish mythology significantly influenced European literature, particularly in developing the Arthurian legends and the Grail quest. This cultural exchange occurred during Ireland's period as a center of Christian scholarship from 500 to 850 CE. The Dullahan is also sometimes seen as an embodiment of the Celtic god or folkloric figure Crom Dubh. In Scottish Gaelic and Old Irish, the name means dark crooked one, who is in turn related to the older pre-Christian Irish god Crom Croch. The major connection of what Crom Croch has with Halloween is the festival Domina Crom Dubh, which celebrates the god of fertility on the last Saturday in July. The festivities would include the ancient practice of human sacrifice and the gifts of mounds of grain, hay, peat, and other gathered goods at summer's end in late July or in early August, around the same time as Samhain, which, even though it could directly break down as Sam, summer, and Fun, end, this idea led linguist Ventris to suggest that this translation is just folk etymology, because then the original version of the holiday would take place in August when summer ends. The word could also translate from the Proto-Celtic Samhain, meaning assemblage, which was suggested by the Irish lore Whitley Stokes back in 1907. No matter when the festival of Samhain took place, the purpose was to celebrate the end of the harvest season and summer, and to welcome in the winter. This short intervening period was marked by the belief that the veil between worlds of the living and the dead was the thinnest, allowing spirits to come back into our world. And this is when the ghost stories and jack-o'-lanterns come into play. By looking frightening, the candlelit lanterns of grotesque faces on the carved turnips, beets, and potatoes protected the homes from supernatural beings, the AOC, and the souls of the dead when placed on windowsills or on doorsteps. According to Hutton and Palmer, these pieces of apotropaic magic were both to frighten people and to ward off evil spirits. This could also harken back to earlier tradition and creates a barrier between the owner's land and everything else, which has a strangely equivalent but unconnected idea to the Herma of ancient Greece. These boundary and road markers were commonly either stacked stone or specially carved stone or wood heads of the god Hermes, the god of fertility, luck, travelers, roads, and boundaries, of his older Mycenaean version Pan, god of the wilderness and madness, or of heroes, philosophers, or other human heads, often complete with the legendary downstairs business. Another connection is that one of Hermes' epithets was as a psychopomp, one who leads the souls of the dead to the afterlife. Like lanterns in other cultures, and the jack-o'-lanterns that may light and lure the souls to the houses, but also act as gargoyles and grotesques, protecting the home from intruders. They also, like jack-o'-lanterns, have use in ancient Greece to ward off harm or evil, and were placed at crossings, country borders, and boundaries as protection, in front of temples, near to tombs, outside houses, in the gymnasia, palaestrae, libraries, porticos, and public places, at the corners of streets, on high roads as signposts, and with distances inscribed on them, and when placed outside homes were seen as good luck. As an aside, the pumpkin wasn't used in the tradition until the 19th century because the orange species of squash, known colloquially as a pumpkin, is a plant native to America, and the Irish immigrants started using them in their tradition soon after their mass emigration out of Ireland because of the infamous potato famine. However, it quickly became very popular to use the larger, easier to carve squash and gourds. But how did these creatures get their name? None of the headless horsemen nor gods had the provincial name of Jack, and that may have been the point. Jack is a common name in fairy and folk tales for common man or the everyman, like Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack and Jill and Jack of all trades. But the Irish legend of Stingy Jack is believed to have been the first source of the jack-o'-lantern name. One version of the tale was published on Halloween in 1835 in the Dublin Penny Journal. We all know how differently stories can be told depending on time and location. Overall, the story goes like this. Stingy Jack was a miserly drunk who commonly lied and manipulated others in the town. The tale varies widely on the introduction of the devil, depending on who's telling it. But he was drinking in a bar late one night when he drank himself silly. And for some reason, this is the night that the devil chose to pay him a visit and play with him. The perfect time. Jack saw the devil in the bar, and not wanting to pay for any of his drinks, Jack asked the devil to sit down with him and have a drink, to which the devil obliged. Of course, Stingy Jack didn't want to pay, being true to his name, and convinced the devil to turn himself into a coin in Jack's purse, because he could do that, to pay for the drinks. then turn himself back later, which would be a hilarious joke on the bartender who was just trying to do his job. Once the devil did so, he was pissed to find himself trapped because Jack kept his purse in his pocket right next to a silver cross, which prevented the devil from changing back into his original form. Eventually, Jack freed the devil under the condition that he would not bother Jack for 1 year, and if Jack died, he would not claim his soul. During the next year, Jack tricked the devil again into climbing into an apple tree to pick a piece of fruit. While he was up in the tree, Jack carved multiple signs of the cross into the tree's bark so that the devil couldn't come down until the devil promised Jack not to bother him for another 10 years. Not long after that, Jack died. As the legend goes, God would not allow such an unsavory figure into heaven, and when sent to hell, the devil, who was still upset by the tricks Jack had played on him, and bound by keeping his word not to claim Jack's soul, would not allow Jack into hell, either as a mocking sentiment or maybe a bit of pity. He tossed a burning coal to Jack and sent him off into the dark night with only that to light his way. Jack put the glowing coal into a carved-out turnip or rutabaga, his favorite food, turning the root into a lantern. Jack, becoming Jack of the Lantern, has been roaming the earth ever since, as one of the many spirits that his namesake are carved to ward against. Of course, this gives the roots of the name to a time while Ireland was under Christian rule, but we are already aware that the practice is older than that, even going back to 500 BCE. The Christian monks that traveled to the Celtic people were the ones who wrote the records, so much of the mythology was changed to folklore. Gods changed to strong but regular human beings, either by the monks or by the people relaying the stories, which luckily kept them within the cultural lexicon. And even today, we are like to interpret the jack-o'-lantern trickster in new ways. The version I enjoy the best is Jack from the 2003 Halloween episode of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Billy and Mandy's jacked up Halloween. In that, they say that Jack is an evil pumpkin-headed prankster who got his head chopped off because he was playing too many pranks on everyone, and the royalty just got sick of it. As another aside, I am surprised that while looking at pictures, so many drawings show jack-o'-lantern-headed scarecrows. One, since crows are omnivores and would be attracted to free pumpkin yummy goodiness. And two, they rot pretty quickly, so farmers would have to replace them every week or so. The concept of a headless horseman also appears in various Asian folklore traditions. Although not in the same way. But in Chinese medieval prose, a story of a delayed death headless horseman dates back to the 5th or 6th centuries, with parallels in South Chinese, North Indian, and medieval Russian folklore. Chinese travel books from the 12th to 14th centuries describe Southeast Asian beings whose heads detach at night to feast on fish or human entrails. A belief confirmed by ethnographic studies and present in southern Chinese legends from the 1st centuries AD. 1st century CE. Recent archaeological findings have shed light on a unique Scythian burial practices involving headless horsemen. A 5th to 4th century BCE burial. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed unusual Scythian burial customs involving headless horsemen. A burial from the 5th to 4th century BCE near Kostorivka village in the Kharkov region contained a decapitated man, horse remains, and weapons, which hinted at a particular funeral tradition. Similar findings in the South Caucasus show that the Sumerian Scythian burials often featured horsemen with their horses and these specific items. Analysis of 2 of the Scythian skeletons from Alexandropol, Ukraine, dated back to 325 BCE and showed evidence of a tough life on horseback and possible sacrificial rituals. These individuals may have served as Scythian king in life and death, reflecting the Scythians' nomadic lifestyle and warrior society. The term jack-o'-lantern was originally used to describe the visual phenomenon of ignis fatuus, or foolish fire, also known as the will-o'-the-wisp in English folklore. Used especially in East England, its earliest known use dates to the 1660s. The term will-o'-the-wisp uses wisp, which is a bundle of sticks or paper sometimes used as a torch, and the proper name will, thus will of the torch, just like the term jack-o'-lantern is of the same construction, jack of the lantern. In several more stories, the jack-o'-lantern shows up to dance, just like wills of the wisp or will of the wisps. These mysterious flames dance over the peat bogs and in the forests of Ireland, Scotland, England, Wales, everywhere in the UK. And as we've heard from the stories of the fairies of old, and the more recent UFO or UAP sightings, or tourists stumbling upon the well-preserved bog mummies that are created up in the frightening bogs, these entities will lead people off the path and possibly to their doom. But the jack-o'-lantern, will-o'-the-wisp idea was not confined to the British Isles. These stories extended to the Netherlands and to northern Germanic area, where there was a specific way of getting rid of them. Jack-o'-lanterns with the long legs is a story from Germany. One late night in the German town of Hermsdorf, a peasant was walking home when he saw a lone jack-o'-lantern. Since it had no reason for being out there, the peasant thought it was odd, and because the peasant was of a courageous nature, he walked up to it. The jack-o'-lantern popped to life and tried to run away with the peasant following close behind. Observing that he, for some reason they gendered a carved pumpkin, had the most wonderfully long legs, and from top to toe consisted of glowing fire. With the same instant, the jack-o'-lantern was set to vanish, and the peasant who gave chase could barely find his way back in the dark. Jack-o'-lanterns being driven away by cursing. In Storkow, there was a clergyman and his servant driving home one late night. Once they reached a certain spot, they both saw a jack-o'-lantern dancing towards them. More and more of them started appearing out of the surrounding forest. At this point, the horses wouldn't move, and the clergyman could only think to pray aloud, so he did. Unfortunately, the praying backfired, and the more he prayed, the more dancing jack-o'-lanterns appeared. The servant, sick of all these shenanigans, yelled out, "Just leave that off." "So they will, but I'll send them packing. Will ye be off in the devil's name?" And that was the moment that all the jack-o'-lanterns were gone. I have no idea what that means. Another story is a jack-o'-lantern caught. Once there was a cowherd near Rathenau who, after spending all day out with the cattle, returned home with one of them missing. The cowherd went out immediately to look for her in the forest. After hours of searching, he got super tired and had to sit down. While sitting a spell and filling up his pipe, the cowherd saw a countless number of jack-o'-lanterns come dancing towards and around him. He was also super brave, so he just kept filling his pipe. He was about to light it up when the jack-o'-lantern started flying around his head, while flames spurted out toward the man. He then grabbed a large stick and started swinging at the orbiting jack-o'-lanterns. But the more he swung, the more jack-o'-lanterns showed up. Fed up with all this, the cowherd reached out and grabbed one, and when he looked at what he was holding, it was bone. That second, all the jack-o'-lanterns disappeared. The cowherd stuck the bone into his pocket, finally lit his pipe and walked home. The next morning, he found the lost cow, lived through the day, and returned home safely. But once night had fallen, the cowherd saw lanterns coming towards his house. It was a huge group of jack-o'-lanterns all crying out, "If you don't give us our comrade, we will burn your house." After a minute of disbelief that the bone could be their comrade, the cowherd threw the bone, I'm assuming it's a skull, out the window, wherein it turned back into a bright flickering jack-o'-lantern and danced away, joining all the joyous others as they left the village. All three of those stories were from Northern mythology, North German, and Netherlandish popular traditions and superstitions, compiled by Benjamin Thorpe in 1852. In a rhyme by the Cornish folklorist Dr. Thomas Quiller Coach that takes place in Palperno, Cornwall, the jack-o'-lantern, along with Joan the Wad, the Cornish version of Will of the Wisp, are tricksy characters. Because of familiarities between the mysterious light characters, the people of Palpero regarded both groups as pixies. Jack-o'-the-lantern, Joan the Wad, who tickled the maid and made her mad. Light me home, the weather's bad. Simpson and Round, 2000. Will of the Wisp were considered as part of the lower spirits and were personified flickering flames, and also connected with wights and elves of the Germanic linguistic context. And in the Pennsylvania Dutch or German culture, the term drach, as in a fiery dragon creature, was used to designate the will of the wisps and the jack-o'-lanterns that followed the timid. Charles P.G. Scott must have been more Christian because he connected the flickering lights with the devil and his imps and gave a lot of name variations on the name. For example, Billy of the Wisp. Otherwise, the will of the wisp is generally known as a manifestation of supernatural light in Wales and adopted in Scotland. They would also be known as elf candles or corpse candles after the Latin quasi-scientific term ignis fatuus. Ignis meaning fire, fatuus meaning giddy, wild, or silly, even though there isn't evidence that the will of the wisp was ever a Greco-Roman mythological idea. After all, the major times when it does appear in literature is mostly by English scientists and authors. Roger Bacon in the 13th century, which was perhaps the first time it was ever written. A line in Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, Act 3, Scene 3, which was around 1590, in Newton's 1672 Optics, and the French chemist Lemery, who in 1675 attempted to accurately scientifically define the phenomena with chemistry, harkening back to ancient people who defined them as naphtha or petroleum flames. As an interesting worldwide phenomena, will of the wisps also appear in other cultures. The chirbati, or ghost light, is a dancing ball of light that can be over the Bani grasslands, a seasonal marshy wetland of India. The Elia, or marsh ghost light, is a name given to a strange little light by the Bengali people, which is said that the light is a type of marsh gas that confuses fishermen and makes them lose their bearings and may lead them to drowning. While in Japan, the wisps are known as hitodama, which translates to human soul as a ball of energy, and are associated with graveyards, but are said to have been seen all over Japan. Also in Japan, specific yokai demons called kitsune would be married, and the offspring of these two kitsune were called kitsune bai, literally translating to foxfire. An Australian equivalent known as the Min Min light, reportedly seen in parts of the outback after dark, with the majority of sightings occurring in the Channel Country region, but also around the continent. These stories even appeared before the colonists ever arrived in Australia. Finally, around Mexico, the balls of light are believed to be brujas, witches, who had transformed into these lights, although the reasons for this vary according to region. But another explanation refers to the lights as an indication of places where gold or hidden treasures are buried, which can be found only with the help of children. In this one, they are called luces del dinero, money lights, or luces del tesoro, treasure lights. There are many more examples, but it's clear to see that the will of the wisp, aka floating balls of light, are a common occurrence in most, if not all, folklore, whether as an evil being, a protector, or just a force of true neutrality, or rather, a pure force of nature. Balls of light is a common occurrence. The idea that lanterns are for showing the way to spirits of ancestors is a common practice in the multitude of Asian and separately disparate Latin American cultures. Though this holiday was also influenced and altered by the conquistador Catholics, Dia de los Muertos, its elements are rooted in Aztec and elder belief systems. Also, specifically for the observance and remembrance of ancestors, is the over 2,000 years running Qingming Festival in China, with the equivalencies in Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore, just to name a few. During this holiday, the temples and tombs are cleaned, and the living visit the dead with food, drink, and the burning of papers and lighting fireworks. On the other side is the Buddhist and Taoist Hungry Ghost Festival, and its many various counterparts all across Asia are the closer equivalent to the European Halloween, when the spirits of the dead return to our plane. In this, the lanterns are candles in paper folded like lotus flowers and floated down the rivers and out to sea to guide the lost souls of forgotten ancestors to the afterlife. Within some of these various and diverse cultures, the roots, squash, paper, and other specially crafted lanterns were thoughtfully designed for the deep love of bringing the ancestors to visit with their still living family members. In these cultures, it is customary to gift them with their favorite food and drink as a way to appease the visiting spirits. Alternatively, these lanterns were often handcrafted with the intention of scaring off these spirits and protecting the family members inside from unwanted harm, and creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. In either case, these beautifully made lanterns are works of art and are historic puzzle pieces that we are incredibly lucky to still have among our traditions today. The connection between the jack-o'-lantern and will-o'-the-wisp folklore reveals a fascinating tapestry of cultural beliefs surrounding light and the unseen. Both symbols play significant roles in their respective narratives, guiding wanderers through the dark while also embodying the allure and danger of the unknown. Historically, the jack-o'-lantern served as a beacon against malevolent spirits during the harvest season, echoing the elusiveness of the will-o'-the-wisps that led travelers astray into treacherous marshes. This interplay highlights humanity's enduring entanglement with the mysteries of the afterlife and the natural world, bridging ancient lore with modern traditions. By examining these connections, we uncover a deeper understanding of how folklore informs our current celebrations, reminding us that light, whether from a carved pumpkin or a flickering glow in the fog, even if the flickering flames are sometimes merely from simple candles left on a mantle, altar, or a gravestone of the deceased, their mysterious wispiness has the power to guide people off their path, or perhaps directly home, if even just for one night. Thank you for listening to Jack of the Dancing Flames of Detours in Archaeology. As always, I want to thank you for your understanding my attempts at pronouncing different names and words in other languages. I very much appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. If I said something completely wrong, I want to be corrected. And I would also like to share that information with the rest of the audience as well. If you like this podcast, please share that opinion with the rest of the internet by rating and reviewing. It really helps the podcast. And it would be really awesome if you could subscribe if you're not already, and turn on automatic downloads if that is an option on the app that you're listening to right now. If you know anyone who likes archaeology, or in this case, ghost stories, share with your friends. It's the perfect time of year for it. Also, if you have more ghost stories, share that with me too. I really like hearing about what people think ghosts are. Or if you have an idea of something for me to delve into, you can comment directly on whatever podcast app you're listening to. Email me directly at detoursinarchaeology@gmail.com, or head over to my website at detoursinarchaeology.com and go to the contact page. I'd especially like to thank my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to join them, head over to my channel's page at patreon.com/detoursinarchaeology, where you can sign up. You get extra goodies every week, like bloopers. You can follow me on Instagram to catch the latest photos at Flying Sepida. Sepida is spelled Sepida. It is the family name for cuttlefish without the E at the end. And don't forget to sign up for email notifications at my website after you read a bunch of different articles. Every Wednesday, I have either an article or one of my personal illustrations posted, which you can get for yourself at the second level on Patreon. All the music used was by Scott Buckley, who you can find at scottbuckley.com.au. For the fun fact today, I'm going to talk about the etymology of the word fall. As I think we all expected, it does refer to the falling leaves. Prior to the terms fall and autumn coming into the common lexicon, the months of September, October, and November were generally referred to as the harvest season, a time of year for gathering the ripened crops. Some of the first recorded uses of the word fall date back to 1500s England, when the term was a shortened version of the fall of the year or fall of the leaf. The 1600s saw the arrival of the word autumn, which came from the French word automne and was popular among writers such as Chaucer and Shakespeare. By the 18th century, autumn became the predominant name for the season in England, though over the following century the word fall would grow more popular across the Atlantic in America. But while some proper British English linguists consider fall to be an Americanism, the term did actually originate in England, and both fall and autumn are used interchangeably. If you have any fun facts, please share them with me and I'll relay them to everyone who listens, and you'll get your own shout out. I'll see you soon for another detour into archaeology. It's not going to be Halloween until next Thursday, but as it is Halloween month, I'll say it. Happy Halloween. Thanks again.